that's how the book of Job is presented to us. There was a man. And the Bible views it as history. It's interesting, if you'll look at these two verses, I've already alluded to James 5, but Job, in a trying sense, is presented along with, in Scripture, several times in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 14. He is put together with Noah, Daniel, and Job. And if you get a chance, go back and look at Ezekiel chapter 14 and the two verses in that chapter, and it's very interesting. So, the Scriptures have elevated Job to a position, and he is esteemed above men. Not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. An incredible figure in God's timeline. Lived in the land of Uz. When I was younger, I always said it sounded so much like me, like the Wizard of Oz, but it's the land of Uz. And that's where he lived. And he was quite the man. And we're going to be reading a little bit here shortly, okay, in the first chapter. What we do know, most likely it is the patriarchal time, because from reading the book, we know the book. It may in fact be the very first early book ever written. A lot of people think Moses was the author, and there are other people who they believe may have written the book. But what we do know from the book, because nothing is ever said about the law, nothing is ever said about the actual physical. All of this is prior to. This goes back to probably close to 4,000 years ago. It may be in fact the oldest document that we have, and it was put into the inspired Word of God. It's a valuable, at least according to God. It is an inspired book, but not all the statements are correct. Because we're going to introduce you to four fellas who made some statements, who said some things that were not true. And we know that because of the end of the book. You got to go all the way to the end to find out what God thought about these four people. And so we know there's a lot of truth in it, obviously, because it is an inspired book. But some of the statements in the book are incorrect. Now, real quick, let's just look at the outline of the book. Any great literature that you're going to read, you have to understand certain things. Job 1 and 2 is what we're going to call the prologue. Chapter 3 is our introductory speech. And then you need to understand, let me just get all these up here for you. Go back. Sorry about that. I'm learning how to use this thing. Go back. Bear with me. Can I go back, Brian? You sure? Yeah, that's what. All right, hang on, folks. There we go. The right button. The left one was. All right. Now, here you go. This is going to be the outline of the book. And then, if you study any piece of literature, this is what we want to understand. What is the outline? And so, after having read all 42 chapters, this is what we have. We have the prologue. We're going to read a little bit of that this morning. Then there's the introductory speech by Job himself. He starts his thing off in chapter 3. And then we have at least 3 cycles of speeches, monologue, if you please, between Job and his friends. And then in chapters 4 through 14 is the first cycle. Eliphaz starts it off. And then Job answers. And Eliphaz again. And then chapters 15 through 21, another cycle. Bildad comes along and he puts in his 2 cents. And then in chapters 22 through 31 is the third cycle of speeches. And then finally comes along the youngest of the 4 in chapters 32 through 37. And his name is Elihu. And so Elihu talks. And then in chapters 38 through 42, now it's God's turn to talk. And God starts it off with basically, who do you think you are? Who is this that darkens my counsel with this knowledge or this lack of understanding? And so God just really lays it on the line. And then we have the epilogue, the closing, in chapter 42. It's just an incredible ending to a great book. And then And then we need to talk about the man himself. Okay? Without a doubt, when you study the book of Job, this man's character, his life is exemplary. Look at let's read verse 1 of Job, chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. The character of this individual, like we say, is absolutely exemplary. Couple Hebrew words, the word perfect and the word upright, meaning it helps us to understand, because this book obviously was written in Hebrew. What we know is those words mean complete or completeness, mature, upright, straightforward, and just. This is a very straightforward book. It's just out there. Okay, there's just no pretensions in any way, shape, or form. Job just lays his heart out there as he sits on the ash heap when he's lost everything, and it's a very, very straightforward book. And what we know, he is one that feared God. He was very reverent and submissive, is what we learn from this great book. Reverent and submissive. And then the scripture just told us he is a man who was exemplary, but he was a man who turned away from evil. He shunned evil. That's what we know a little bit about the character of this man. Now, it's his character, it's who he was as a person that prepares him for the suffering and the pain and the heartache and the loss in which he is about to endure. And that's why James said, remember Job. You remember the perseverance of Job and how God blessed him, particularly at the later end of his life. So he was a wealthy man. Again, the scripture makes that clear. He was abundantly wealthy, as we know. He had 7 boys and 3 daughters. Really almost close to my family. We had 7 boys and 4 girls. But he was a man of great substance. He was wealthy. Again, you can read there all of the livestock, all the animals, and all the sort. He was a very wealthy man. Probably one of the most wealthiest men. And had a large family, 10 kids altogether. And then what we do know is, what we learn is that he was concerned for the spiritual welfare of his children. As we know, as we read the text, Job was concerned for his children. And so he would go and offer sacrifices on their behalf, because he said, unless his kids may have offended or sinned against God. And so this is how we know that most likely the book, its setting in its historical context, is in the time of the patriarchal age. We just know that, and we're very confident that that's exactly when the book was written. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the first trial. So if you will join me in reading, let's start with chapter 1, and I want to read the text, and we want to look at the first trial here of Job's first trial, and we're going to see what happens here. So let's read down through 6 through 22. We're just going to start in verse 6 and go through the end of the chapter. Here we go. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." And then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, now look at this question. This is paramount to this understanding here, this dialogue that takes place between God and Satan. Look at this great question that he asked. Does Job fear God for nothing?